The park buzzed with life as sunlight danced through the trees and laughter echoed across the pass. Amid this peaceful backdrop, a storm brewed. Officer Kane, his presence commanding yet unnervingly arrogant, scanned the area like a hawk. His eyes locked onto a man sitting on a bench, a man who seemed out of place. It was the Hollywood icon, a figure recognized worldwide for his grace and strength, dressed in a hoodie and sunglasses, blending in with the ordinary parkgoers. Kane's lips curled into a sneer. The sight of the Hollywood icon ignited a spark of disdain within him. "What's this guy doing here?" he muttered under his breath, his tone dripping with prejudice. His badge felt heavier with authority, fueling his false sense of power. Without hesitation, Kane approached, each step crunching against the gravel with deliberate weight, his baton swinging ominously at his side. The Hollywood icon, seated in serene solitude, glanced up, his composure unshaken. He wasn't there to draw attention, just to enjoy a moment of peace. But peace was far from what Kane intended to offer. "Hey, what are you doing here?" Kane's voice pierced through the calm like a whip. "You can't just loiter around." The Hollywood icon blinked, his calm demeanor masking the annoyance brewing beneath the surface. Slowly he lowered his sunglasses, revealing sharp, piercing eyes that had graced countless screens. His voice, low and measured, carried the weight of quiet authority. "I'm just enjoying the park," he replied, his words calm yet firm, rippling through the tense air like a subtle challenge. Kane's sneer deepened, his prejudiced assumptions hardening into unearned conviction. "People like you don't belong here," he snapped, his tone filled with venomous arrogance. His grip on the baton tightened as he leaned forward, trying to intimidate. But the Hollywood icon's gaze didn't waver. "What do you mean by people like me?" the Hollywood icon asked, his voice steady but carrying a dangerous edge. Each word sliced through Kane's assumptions, challenging the very core of his prejudice. Kane's face twisted in irritation. "Don't get smart with me," he snarled, stepping closer. His intent was clear. This was more than a simple confrontation. The air grew thick with tension, and the park's tranquil sounds faded into the background. Something big was about to unfold. Kane loomed over the Hollywood icon, his presence an oppressive weight. The tension between them was palpable, like a coiled spring ready to snap. The Hollywood icon remained seated, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the storm of aggression emanating from Kane. "Get up!" Kane barked, his voice sharp and commanding. He leaned in closer, trying to use his size and badge to intimidate. "This isn't a place for you to sit around all day. Move along before I make you." The Hollywood icon tilted his head slightly, his expression unchanging. His silence was unnerving, as though he were measuring Kane, dissecting the arrogance and prejudice before him. Finally he spoke, his voice calm, but with an undertone of authority that couldn't be ignored. "Officer, I'm not breaking any laws by sitting here. I have every right to enjoy this park." Kane's face flushed with anger, his eyes narrowing into slits. "I don't care about your rights," he spat, his words laced with disdain. "When I tell you to move, you move. Don't test me." The crowd around them began to take notice, the calm of the park disrupted by the heated exchange. Curious eyes turned toward the confrontation, some whispering to each other while others instinctively reached for their phones. Kane, too consumed by his growing rage, seemed oblivious to the growing attention. The Hollywood icon's gaze sharpened, and a faint flicker of irritation crossed his face. He rose slowly, his towering frame casting a shadow over Kane. The move was deliberate, sending a clear message. This wasn't a man who could be intimidated. "You don't scare me," the Hollywood icon said evenly, his voice resonating with quiet power. Kane's fingers curled around his baton, his knuckles turning white as his grip tightened. His arrogance wouldn't let him back down. Not now. Not in front of the eyes watching them. "Don't make me do something you'll regret," he growled, the threat hanging in the air like a dark cloud. The Hollywood icon's expression didn't change. Instead, he took a step closer, his presence dominating. "You're already doing something you'll regret," he said, his words cutting through the tension like a blade. His tone carried a quiet warning, a promise that Kane was stepping into dangerous territory. Kane sneered, his ego refusing to let him see reason. Big words for someone who's about to get knocked down, he snapped. His baton twitched in his hand, the weapon an extension of his overblown confidence. You don't know who you're dealing with. The Hollywood icon's lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. No, he replied, his voice calm and deliberate. You don't know who you're dealing with. The onlookers held their breath, the intensity of the moment drawing them closer. Kane, blinded by his arrogance, took a step back and then forward again, his body language screaming aggression. He swung the baton forward in a threatening motion, not yet striking, but close enough to send a clear message. But the Hollywood icon didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. Instead, he crossed his arms, his imposing figure an unmovable force. That badge doesn't give you the right to harass people, he said, his voice rising slightly, carrying his words to the crowd around them. Not me, not anyone. Kane's face contorted in fury, his pride stung by the Hollywood icon's defiance. That's it, he shouted, his voice echoing across the park. The escalation was unavoidable now, the confrontation teetering on the edge of something far more dangerous. As Kane's baton twitched in his hand again, the crowd collectively felt the weight of what was coming. The tension reached its peak, and the serene afternoon transformed into a stage for a battle of wills. Kane's fury boiled over, his composure shattered by the Hollywood icon's calm defiance. Without warning, he swung the baton, its arc cutting through the air with a sickening whoosh. The crowd gasped in unison, their shock rippling like a wave as the brutal blow landed squarely on the Hollywood icon's back. The sound of the impact echoed through the park, a sharp, visceral crack that silenced the murmurs of the onlookers. The Hollywood icon staggered forward slightly, the force of the strike undeniable. But he didn't fall. His broad shoulders stiffened, and for a moment he didn't move, as if absorbing the pain and processing the sheer audacity of the attack. The park seemed to hold its breath. Eyes were wide, hands covered mouths, and the collective shock was palpable. Phones were raised higher, their cameras capturing every moment of the unfolding drama. The Hollywood icon straightened slowly, his movements deliberate and steady. His sunglasses, knocked askew by the blow, slipped off his face and fell to the ground, revealing his intense, unyielding gaze. Kane's breathing was heavy, his chest rising and falling rapidly. The baton trembled slightly in his grip, not from fear but from the adrenaline coursing through him. He expected submission, for the Hollywood icon to cower or retreat, but instead he was met with an eerie, unshakable calm. The crowd murmured in disbelief, their focus glued to the Hollywood icon's next move. The Hollywood icon turned his head slightly, locking eyes with Kane. His gaze was steely, unflinching, and carried the weight of someone who had faced far greater challenges than an angry officer with a baton. Big mistake, he said, his voice low and controlled, yet filled with a chilling intensity that sent shivers through the air. Kane took a step back, his bravado faltering for a split second, but his arrogance refused to let him back down. You think you're tough, he spat, raising the baton again. I'll show you tough. The crowd collectively gasped as Kane swung again, but this time, the Hollywood icon was ready. With lightning-fast reflexes, he turned, his arm shooting up to intercept the baton mid-swing. His hand closed around it with a force that seemed almost superhuman, stopping the weapon dead in its tracks. The sheer power in that single motion stunned the onlookers, their gasps turning into murmurs of awe. The Hollywood icon tightened his grip, wrenching the baton from Kane's hands with effortless precision. The weapon clattered to the ground, a sound that felt like a gavel slamming down in a courtroom. Kane stumbled back, his confidence crumbling as the crowd erupted into cheers. The shift in power was unmistakable, and Kane's face twisted in a mixture of shock and humiliation. You want to hurt people for no reason? The Hollywood icon's voice cut through the noise, commanding absolute attention. He took a step forward, towering over Kane, who now looked smaller, almost insignificant. That's not how this works. Kane's eyes darted around, searching for a way out. But the crowd had formed a loose circle around them, their phones still recording, their expressions a mixture of anger and satisfaction. The Hollywood icon's words weren't just for Kane, they were for everyone watching. This is what happens when you abuse your power. Kane's mouth opened, but no words came out. His arrogance, his ego, everything that had fueled his actions until now had been stripped away, leaving only a trembling shadow of the man who had started this confrontation. The Hollywood icon bent down and picked up the baton, holding it in his hand for a moment before tossing it aside with a dismissive flick of his wrist. The crowd cheered again, their voices growing louder, a chorus of approval for the justice unfolding before their eyes. "You don't get to decide who belongs and who doesn't," the Hollywood icon said, his voice firm and resolute. Kane's face flushed crimson, his humiliation complete. He looked around desperately, but the crowd wasn't on his side. They were with the Hollywood icon, their cheers and applause a stark reminder of his failure. The Hollywood icon took another step forward, his presence overwhelming. "You messed with the wrong person," he said, his words carrying the weight of finality. Kane's knees seemed to buckle slightly, and for the first time, he looked truly afraid. The moment hung in the air, heavy with tension and resolution. The Hollywood icon had not only turned the tables, but had done so with a grace and control that left everyone watching in awe. The crowd roared their approval, their cheers echoing through the park as Kane stood frozen, his authority shattered. Kane stood frozen, his humiliation complete, his mind scrambling to regain control of the situation. But the man before him was no ordinary parkgoer. The Hollywood icon, his towering frame now fully upright, radiated an intensity that seemed to draw every eye in the park. His calm composure had shifted into something far more formidable, a quiet, controlled fury that crackled like electricity in the air. "You think that badge makes you untouchable?" The Hollywood icon's voice was low, deliberate, and chilling. Each word carried the weight of authority and the promise of consequences. The crowd fell silent, captivated by the sheer presence of the man they had only moments ago seen as an anonymous park visitor. Kane's arrogance faltered, his eyes darting to the baton lying on the ground a few feet away. He took a hesitant step forward, his hand twitching as if considering a move to reclaim his weapon. The Hollywood icon's eyes followed the motion, and his lips curled into a faint smile, one that wasn't friendly, but rather a predator's acknowledgement of its prey. "Go ahead," the Hollywood icon said, his voice laced with an unsettling calm. "Pick it up. Let's see what you got." The challenge hung in the air, and Kane froze, his bravado draining like water through a sieve. The crowd murmured in anticipation, their phones still recording every second of the unfolding drama. Kane's face twisted in anger, but now there was something else beneath the surface. Fear. "You don't scare me," Kane snapped, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. He took another step forward, but the Hollywood icon moved faster. In one fluid motion, he closed the distance between them, his sheer presence enough to force Kane to stumble back. "You don't belong here," Kane growled, his words a weak echo of the confidence he'd shown earlier. But the Hollywood icon didn't flinch. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if considering the statement, before responding with quiet finality. "No, you don't belong here," the Hollywood icon said. His words carried a weight that seemed to settle heavily on Kane's shoulders. "People like you, those who use their power to hurt others, you're the problem." Kane's frustration boiled over, and he lunged forward, his movements clumsy and untrained. The Hollywood icon didn't move at first, letting Kane's momentum carry him forward. At the last possible second, the Hollywood icon sidestepped smoothly, his footwork as precise as a trained fighter's. Kane stumbled, nearly losing his balance, as the crowd erupted in gasps and murmurs of disbelief. "That's it?" the Hollywood icon asked, his voice cutting through the commotion. "That's your best shot?" There was no mockery in his tone, only cold, measured confidence, the kind that came from years of discipline and experience. Kane's face turned crimson, his humiliation now undeniable. He clenched his fists, his body coiled like a spring, ready to launch another attack. But the Hollywood icon's expression didn't change. If anything, his calmness seemed to unsettle Kane further. "You're done," the Hollywood icon said simply, his tone final. "Walk away while you still can." But Kane couldn't. His pride wouldn't let him. He lunged again, his arms outstretched, aiming to tackle the Hollywood icon. This time, the Hollywood icon moved faster. With a calculated twist of his body, he sidestepped Kane and extended a leg, tripping the officer and sending him sprawling onto the ground. The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices filling the park as Kane lay face down in the grass, stunned and humiliated. The Hollywood icon stood over him, his stance unshakable, his expression unreadable. He didn't gloat, didn't celebrate. He simply stood there, a silent testament to strength and justice. Kane rolled onto his back, his face a mask of rage and humiliation. But when he looked up at the Hollywood icon, he saw no fear, no hesitation, only the calm, commanding presence of a man who had nothing to prove and everything to defend. "You should have walked away," the Hollywood icon said, his voice steady and unyielding. And with that, the balance of power shifted entirely, leaving Kane to face the consequences of his own actions. The park fell into a hushed silence as the two officers took in the scene before them. Kane, disheveled and humiliated, stood trembling, his face a mixture of anger and panic. The Hollywood icon, towering and composed, exuded an unshakable authority that made even the new arrivals hesitate. The first officer, a young man with wide eyes, stepped forward cautiously. "Wait a second. Is that?" His voice trailed off, his disbelief evident as recognition dawned. "That's the Hollywood icon." His partner nodded, his own expression torn between awe and confusion. "Yeah, it is," he murmured, lowering his hand from the baton at his hip. The sight of the Hollywood icon, standing resolutely in the middle of the park, was so surreal it left them momentarily stunned. Kane, desperate to regain control of the situation, pointed an accusatory finger at the Hollywood icon. "Arrest him!" he barked, his voice cracking under the strain of his fury. "He assaulted an officer." The younger officer exchanged a glance with his partner, hesitation written all over his face. Slowly he turned to Kane. "What exactly happened here?" he asked, his tone cautious. Kane's frustration boiled over, and he jabbed his finger toward the Hollywood icon again. "He attacked me, that's what. Are you just going to stand there?" But his words carried no weight. The new officers had already begun to see the truth in the eyes of the crowd. Dozens of bystanders stood with their phones raised, capturing every second. Their expressions told the story clearly. Kane wasn't the victim here. The older officer stepped forward, his demeanor firm but professional. "Sir," he addressed the Hollywood icon, his tone laced with deference. "Are you okay? Did he—" He didn't finish the sentence, but his gaze flicked to Kane, his unspoken question obvious. The Hollywood icon nodded slowly. "I'm fine," he said, his voice steady, "but I think you've got bigger problems to deal with." He glanced at Kane, his words striking like a hammer. Kane stammered, his bravado slipping further. "You can't believe him. He's just—" His words faltered as the reality of the situation finally began to sink in. His authority, once unquestioned, had evaporated entirely. The senior officer's eyes hardened as he turned to Kane. "We'll take it from here," he said coldly. The crowd's murmurs grew louder as the senior officer stepped toward Kane, his posture radiating authority. "Officer Kane," he said, his voice cold and deliberate, "your actions today will not go unnoticed. You've overstepped your bounds, and there are witnesses. Plenty of them." Kane's mouth opened to protest, but the senior officer raised a hand, silencing him. "Enough," he snapped. "You've embarrassed this department, and your behavior will be dealt with." Turning to the younger officer, he added, "Take his badge and weapon." The crowd erupted into cheers as the younger officer hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. Kane's face flushed a deep crimson as his badge was unpinned and his gun removed from its holster. The humiliation was complete, and he stood frozen, unable to do anything but glare at the ground. The Hollywood icon, watching the scene unfold, remained composed, his presence commanding but calm. He took a step forward, addressing the crowd now, his deep, resonant voice cutting through the noise. "This isn't just about what happened here today," he began, his tone firm yet filled with quiet passion. "It's about standing up to injustice, no matter who you are or where you come from." The park grew silent as his words settled over the gathering. Faces turned toward him, their expressions reflecting admiration and agreement. The Hollywood icon continued, his voice carrying the weight of experience and conviction. Abuse of power isn't something we can ignore. It's up to all of us to call it out when we see it, to stand together and demand better. The crowd responded with murmurs of agreement, their focus entirely on the Hollywood icon. He took another step forward, his gaze sweeping over the sea of faces. No one deserves to be judged or treated unfairly because of how they look or where they're from, he said. And no one, no matter their title or position, has the right to mistreat others. A wave of applause broke out, starting small and swelling to a roar. The Hollywood icon raised a hand, quieting them once more. "This isn't about me," he said, his voice softening slightly. "It's about all of us. Together we can demand change. Together we can make sure that people like him," he gestured toward Kane, "are held accountable." The senior officer standing nearby nodded in agreement. "Well said," he muttered, his respect for the Hollywood icon clear. The crowd cheered again, their voices filled with a renewed sense of purpose. The Hollywood icon stepped back, giving them a moment to process his words. A young boy pushed through the crowd, clutching a small notebook in his hands, his eyes wide with awe. "Sir," the boy said, his voice trembling with excitement, Can I get your autograph?" The Hollywood icon's serious expression softened instantly, a warm smile spreading across his face. He knelt to the boy's level, taking the notebook and pen from his hands. "Of course, buddy," he said, his tone filled with genuine kindness. "What's your name?" "Ethan," the boy whispered, his cheeks flushed with excitement. As the Hollywood icon signed the notebook, the crowd watched in admiration, the moment a poignant reminder of the humanity that had brought them together. The Hollywood icon finished signing the notebook, handing it back to Ethan with a warm smile. "Here you go, Ethan," he said, his voice gentle and reassuring. "Keep being strong, buddy." The boy's face lit up with pure joy as he clutched the signed notebook to his chest. "Thank you, sir," he exclaimed, his excitement bubbling over. The moment was simple, yet deeply touching, a stark contrast to the intensity of what had unfolded earlier. Ethan's mother stepped forward from the crowd, her face a mixture of gratitude and admiration. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "for standing up today, for all of us." Her words carried the weight of sincerity, her appreciation reflecting the sentiment of everyone present. The Hollywood icon stood, towering over the crowd, but somehow making everyone feel seen. He nodded at the woman, his expression thoughtful. "It's not just about standing up for myself," he said, addressing her, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's about standing up for what's right, for everyone." The crowd responded with murmurs of agreement, their admiration for the Hollywood icon deepening with every word. This wasn't just a celebrity moment, it was a shared experience of justice and solidarity. The senior officer approached cautiously, his demeanor professional but respectful. "Sir," he began, glancing briefly at Kane, who stood a few feet away, still reeling from his public disgrace. "On behalf of the department, I want to apologize for what happened here today. This isn't how we operate, or how we should operate." The Hollywood icon turned to him, his expression serious. "It's not about apologies," he said evenly. "It's about accountability, making sure this doesn't happen again." The officer nodded solemnly, acknowledging the weight of the Hollywood icon's words. The crowd still gathered around, listened intently, their respect for the Hollywood icon evident in their silence. As the tension began to dissolve, the Hollywood icon's gaze shifted back to the boy, who was still holding his notebook tightly. "Remember, Ethan," he said with a smile, "always stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." Ethan nodded eagerly, his wide eyes shining with admiration. The crowd erupted into applause once more, their cheers filled with a sense of unity and hope. The Hollywood icon had turned a moment of conflict into a lesson for everyone, leaving an indelible mark on all who had witnessed it. As the applause settled, the Hollywood icon looked around, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. Their faces were filled with a mix of gratitude, admiration, and hope. For a moment he stood silently, letting the weight of the moment sink in. The golden rays of the setting sun bathed the park in a warm glow, casting long shadows that stretched across the ground. The Hollywood icon turned, his steps purposeful and steady as he began walking away from the crowd. His broad shoulders and towering frame exuded quiet strength, his presence larger than life, yet deeply human. The crowd parted instinctively, their applause reigniting as he walked through them. Phones captured his exit, the cheers echoing like a triumphant anthem. A young girl in the front row whispered, "He's a real hero," her voice carrying a sense of awe that resonated with those around her. The Hollywood icon glanced back one last time, his expression calm but resolute. He nodded toward the crowd, a silent acknowledgement of their support, before continuing down the path. The sun dipped lower, its rays illuminating his silhouette as he disappeared into the horizon. The park fell quiet, but the impact of what had transpired lingered, a powerful reminder of the strength found in standing up for what's right.